From imported designs to uniquely Australian armored experiments, Australia built tanks to fight a global war from a distant continent. This is the story of every Australian tank ever made. Australia entered the age of armored warfare without a long tradition of tank design. Unlike major powers, Australia did not initially build its own tanks. Instead, it relied on British doctrine, British vehicles, and British industrial support. But World War II changed everything. Cut off from traditional supply lines and facing the threat of invasion, Australia was forced to develop its own armored solutions, quickly, creatively, and with limited resources. What followed was a short but fascinating chapter in tank history. Early armored experience. British Mark IV and Mark V, Australian service. Australia's first exposure to tanks came through British designs. The Mark IV and Mark V tanks were used primarily for training and doctrinal development rather than combat. They introduced Australian forces to armored operations and maintenance. While not Australian-built, they laid the foundation for future local production. Interwar period. During the interwar years, Australia maintained only a small armored capability. Limited budgets and reliance on British supply meant no indigenous tank designs were pursued. Armored doctrine existed, but domestic production had not yet begun. That changed dramatically after 1941. World War II. Australia builds its own tanks. Sentinel AC I. The Sentinel AC I was Australia's first domestically designed and produced tank. Built under extreme time pressure, it featured a fully cast hull, an unusual choice that simplified production. Armed with a modest gun and powered by locally available components, it was designed primarily for home defense. Although it never saw combat, the Sentinel proved that Australia could build tanks independently. Sentinel AC II. The AC II was an improved concept intended to mount a more powerful gun. Design work advanced, but changing battlefield requirements and supply realities prevented full production. The project highlighted Australia's ambition to keep pace with evolving armored warfare. Sentinel AC III Thunderbolt. The AC III represented a major leap forward. It was designed to carry significantly heavier armament and improved armor. A new engine configuration provided better performance, making it the most capable Sentinel variant. Despite its promise, the AC III arrived too late to see combat. Sentinel AC IV. The AC IV was the ultimate evolution of the Sentinel program. Designed to mount a high-velocity anti-tank gun, it would have matched contemporary Allied tanks in firepower. Only prototypes were completed before the program was canceled. With Allied supply lines restored, local production was no longer necessary. Australian modified British tanks. Matilda II, Australian service. The Matilda II became one of the most important tanks used by Australian forces. Its heavy armor made it well-suited for jungle warfare in the Pacific. Australian crews adapted the tank with local modifications for tropical conditions. Though British-built, it became closely associated with Australian armored operations. Matilda Frog Flamethrower. Australia developed a flamethrower variant of the Matilda for bunker-clearing operations. The Frog replaced the main gun with a flamethrower system designed for close combat. It proved highly effective against fortified Japanese positions. Matilda Murray. An improved flamethrower version with greater range and reliability. The Murray represented Australia's ability to adapt existing tanks to specific battlefield needs. Post-war and Cold War era. After World War II, Australia did not continue domestic tank production. Instead, it relied on imported armored vehicles from Allied nations. Focus shifted toward integration with broader Western defense strategies. Local tank manufacturing was no longer economically viable. Experimental and trial vehicles. Australian armored prototypes. Several experimental projects explored armored vehicle concepts using local industry. Most remained at prototype or test stage and never entered service. They reflected lessons learned during the Sentinel program. Why Australian tanks were unique. Australian tank development was shaped by necessity, not doctrine. Key characteristics included rapid development under threat, use of local materials and engines, focus on home defense and jungle warfare, heavy adaptation rather than mass production. Australia built tanks not to dominate battlefields, but to ensure survival if isolated. Australia's tank history was brief, but remarkable. In just a few years, the country went from total dependence to designing and producing its own armored vehicles. The Sentinel tanks never fired shots in battle, but they proved that Australian industry could rise to extraordinary challenges. This was not a story of quantity. It was a story of urgency, ingenuity, and adaptation. If circumstances had been different, do you think Australia would have continued building its own tanks?